in European Languages and Studies, and my area is Italian. So I am especially thrilled that Julia Lupton, who you usually see in this role up here, I think, invited me this year to co-organize this event. As you know, in connection with the New Swan season, every year there are educational and kind of contextual events, enrichment events, and this is one of those. We're really excited about our speakers today, and I'll come back to the future events at the end of this. I want to also just cue you into a few things that are going to be happening after the season is over. But today we have a program that includes two lecture-type presentations, but they're going to be a little bit more than lectures given the topic. And in between them, we're going to do this Italian thing, which was part of the Italian plays of the Renaissance. In between the acts, they would have something called an intermezzo. And some spectators actually like the intermezzos better than the plays. They know a lot about the intermezzos because they wrote about those, and they said, and then there were a couple more acts of the play. So we thought we would put an intermezzo in here that's a 15 or so minute commedia dell'arte demonstration, and you'll see why that fits in so well with Shakespeare's corpus as we move along. It's not unusual for Shakespeare to set his plays in Italy, at least half of them, depending on, well, half of them for sure, maybe more if you count the ones set in ancient Rome, were set in Italy, and others were set in England, as you know, or places like Scotland, Denmark, so there is a deep connection that is much discussed in Shakespeare scholarship between Shakespeare and Italy. We won't go into that because it's complicated and I don't know the answers. I'm just going to go ahead and introduce our speakers, and for those of you who are here for the first time, I'll just point out exits are illuminated here and restrooms are outside and around the corner to the right. Okay? So, our first speaker is Professor Robert Henke, who is Professor of Drama and Comparative Literature at Washington University. He has published books on Shakespeare's late plays, the Commedia dell'arte, and representations of poverty and charity in Renaissance theater. He is the editor of A Cultural History of Theater in the Early Modern Age, and has edited two essay collections for the Theater Without Borders Collective, the Theater Without Borders Collective. He's director of Washington University Prison Educational Project, a program that offers college courses and degree programs to incarcerated students at Missouri Eastern Correctional Center in Pacific, Missouri. He's currently writing a book on the resonance of Italian theater and performance in Shakespeare's plays. And this November, for those of you who may be in St. Louis, at Washington University, he will be performing the role of Krapp in Krapp's Last King, the play by Samuel Beckett. So I want to welcome Rob Henke to the stage.
Thanks so much, Deanna. I really appreciate the introduction. I'm going to try it this way, but we have a contract. If you can't hear me, you have to make gestures. You have to let me know. And I'll either use a mic or I'll use even more of an outdoor voice. So it's really great to be here. Really appreciate the invitation from Julia, Eli, and Deanna. I'm actually a Californian. I'm from Northern California. Be nice to me. Giants fan, sorry. No, I'm a Cardinals fan, and I'm actually pulling for the Dodgers this year because I think it's time. And they should, they've been in there every year, so I think they got to do it. But it's really nice to be here at Irvine. I'm just wondering, how many of you have? This is just such a great group. I just love the public interest in Shakespeare. How many of you have seen Two Gentlemen of Verona? Wow! Oh my gosh! And how many of you have seen Merchant of Venice? Whoa! Okay, this is like the ideal audience. So I'm going to learn some things from you, especially in the Q&A. I'd love to hear your observations, your perspectives on on the play and maybe some observations that, by virtue of these plays, that I don't have. All right, so I will begin. 400 years ago, many Englishmen believed that the best way to make England great again was to purge it of foreign influence, putting England first in the domains of politics, international trade, and culture. Since the early 16th century, people had been arguing that there were simply too many foreign immigrants in London and across England, taking good jobs away from good Englishmen. In a notorious Easter sermon in 1517, a fiery populist preacher named Dr. Bell inflamed the crowd with xenophobic invective, arguing that foreign strangers eat the bread from the poor fatherless children. Bell provocatively urged the English to, listen to this, cherish and defend themselves and to hurt and grieve aliens for the common good. Particular animus was held against Dutch and Flemish immigrants and the wealthy foreign merchants and bankers, some of them Italian, living at Lombard Street. 2 weeks later, on what has been come to known as Evil May Day, a mob of angry English apprentices took Bell at his word, marched to an area north of St. Paul's inhabited by Flemish immigrants, and violently looted their houses. The fact, unacknowledged by the xenophobes, was that Flemish and Dutch immigrants actually made great contributions to the English economy, and that the vigorous English-Dutch trade was beneficial for both countries. If a sense of economic English identity for many was being constructed by demonizing foreign workers, many Englishmen felt just as strongly that foreign culture was also corrupting the English, effeminating them, as the charge explicitly gendered it, stripping them of the proper English pith, without which they could surely be no nation. And here the culprit, as the xenophobes saw it, were the Italians. True, Italy was the home of humanism, sublime pictorial art, great writers such as Petrarch, blah, blah, blah. But was it not also the redoubt of popery, atheism, same thing, murderous Machiavels, poison, and God knows what else? Italy exerted a powerful, some believed, inordinate influence on English letters. In the field of romance epic, from Ariosto to Spenser, in lyric poetry, from Petrarch to Wyatt, and in theater, it is possible to argue, if a bit perversely, that the first great English comedy was George Gascoigne's 1566 Supposes, a translation, if a brilliant one, of an Italian playwright and author, Ariosto, his play, I Suppositi. For aristocratic young Englishmen, the grand tour of Italy was essential, but critics such as Roger Ascham argued that it was corrupting scores of young Englishmen. Ascham captured the moral danger of foreign influence in a catchy, we might even say tweetable phrase, quote, "Un inglese italianato è un diavolo incarnato." You get it. An Italian ate English is a devil incarnate. Who needs facts with phrases like this? Although the Italian professional theater had much more international cachet than that of Shakespeare, nobody knew about Shakespeare outside of England except a few Germans. Most English had a superior attitude toward the commedia dell'arte, as it later came to be known, the theater of Pantalone and Zani, our friends this afternoon. So you know my perspective. Shakespeare's contemporary Thomas Nash said, "Our players are not as the players beyond the sea of sort of squirting bawdy comedians that have whores and common courtesans to play women's part and forbear no immodest speech or unchaste actions that may provoke laughter, but our scene is more stately furnished, not consisting like theirs of a pantaloon, a whore, and a Zani, but of emperors, kings, and princes whose true tragedies they do vaunt." Here, clearly the idea of an emerging English theatrical nation is constructed on the backs of the foreigner who is at once puny and oversexed. Those Italians are just dirty. What's the deal with having women play female roles? Our English boys are very good at it too. They're better. My favorite document in theater history is this guy, Thomas Coriat. He goes to Venice to see some plays, and he says, "Yeah, I saw something really interesting. I saw women acting women's roles, and you know they were almost as good as our boys." For Nash, the Commedia dell'arte is ridiculous, trivial, obscene, no match for the great English theater, but relatively harmless. It was not so for other English, particularly some Protestant pamphleteers who invoked the Italian actors' distinct use of masks as code for papal Italian deception. In a virulent 1625 tract by a certain Matthew Sutcliffe, the speaker accuses his Catholic adversary of being a mountebank and a zani and playing with a vizard. Commedia-style actors, in fact, actually did perform with mountebanks in Italian piazzas. But Sutcliffe positively equates the two. To be a zani is to bamboozle a credulous public with a charlatan's box of drugs and serpents, and to be a mountebank is to engage in histrionic deceit. Both figures, just like those Catholics, achieve a virtuosic and damnable prowess in the art of vizardry. In a very strange document that I haven't quite decoded yet from the Mantuan State Archives, Catholic fugitives from England, now safely back in Italy, report on an anti-Catholic play that they had seen performed in London in a great hall and presumably before the Queen herself. As an interlude in this anti-papal play, English actors played Pantalone as a Catholic priest, performing the Mass with Zani as his clerical assistant. As priest Pantalone and deacon Zani raised the host, an actor dressed as a devil snatched it away. As in Sutcliffe's pamphlet, the Commedia dell'arte becomes an ominous code for papal subterfuge. The theater of masks will lead us all to the Antichrist. With Sutcliffe, Ben Jonson, the playwright, contemporary Shakespeare, associates the Commedia dell'arte with degraded forms of piazza entertainment. In his Venice play Volpone, the character Volpone impersonates the mountebank and actor Scotto of Mantua, an actual historical figure who had performed card tricks, sleight of hand tricks, and other things before Queen Elizabeth. In his quest to seduce the young Celia, Volpone Scotto sets up his trestle stage, let's put it out there somewhere, under Celia's window, let's put that up here, in St. Mark's Square. Scotto, down there, does his virtuosic bit and manages to get Celia up here to throw her handkerchief to him from the window. The ultimate horror of Celia's pathologically jealous husband Corvino, after this attempt at theatrical seduction, is that he has been cast as what? A Commedia dell'arte character, the avaricious, jealous, and lustful old man Pantalone. So remember, I'm up here, I'm up on the second story of a nice penthouse in St. Mark's Square, and Scotto's down there. Come down! No house but mine to make your scene? Flaminio, will you down, sir, down? What, is my wife your Franceschina? Ere tomorrow I shall be new christened and called the Pantalone dei Bisognosi about the town. With transnational friends like this, who needs enemies? For the enraged Corvino, the wily mountebank Scotto has cast himself as the arte lover Flaminio, who schemes to cuckold the Pantalone Corvino by seducing his wife, Celia, the young, attractive lover, or innamorata. Also in the play Volpone, Jonson nicely captures Ascham's denunciation of English travel to Italy and the ridiculous couple Sir Politic and Sir Lady Woodby, who have come to Venice to ape Italian culture and customs. Lady Woodby, for her part, is a sort of comparative literature doctoral student gone horribly wrong. She's read every 16th century Italian writer and wants to tell everybody about that every single day. Oh yes, I've read that too, you know. To be fair, although I don't think we've quite yet discovered the soul of Pantalone. Did we do the title? The title of my talk? Yeah, the title of my talk is The Soul of Pantalone, Italian Commedia dell'arte in Shakespeare, and it's soul, S-O-L-E. It's a pun. Okay, so to be fair, although I don't think we've quite discovered the soul, that's fine. Although I don't think we've quite discovered the soul of Pantalone, Johnson, the great playwright, in fact, sharply contrasts the Sutcliffes and the Aschams. Although in a resolutely satiric mode, he has here thoroughly absorbed a foreign cultural influence, to the point where we could argue that the energies of the Commedia dell'arte significantly animate, in a powerful and enjoyable way, Johnson's play. As a Venetian Magnifico and one with real power, the character of Volpone invokes the long history of the arte Pantalone, whose original designation as Magnifico evokes the possibility of urban gravitas and authority against which the comic notes of the flawed old man are played. Mosca, ambitious parasite and volatile servant, provides another Johnsonian example of an arte character for whom the stakes have been raised. And I may not fit into my lecture, but I twist my arm and I easily do it. You can think of, if you know the play Othello, Iago as similarly like Mosca, sort of servant on steroids, a kind of Zanni or Brighella, who's like really ambitious, really upwardly mobile, really has a sense of, I know my place, I deserve this. That guy, Cassio, Florentine, he doesn't know what he's talking about, a sense of injured merit. So it's the sense of Johnson and Shakespeare raising these, in some ways raising the ante on these commedia dell'arte characters. The legacy hunters in Johnson's play draw on the deep mythopoetic source of zoomorphism, perhaps more particularly on medieval bestiary than on anything else. So the characters all have animal names, raven and crow and so forth. But these characters also recall the fundamental ties of commedia dell'arte characters with animal forces as brilliantly performed by a great Italian actor and writer who won the Nobel Prize for Literature, Dario Fo. Johnson's knowledge of mountebanks and the commedia dell'arte is fairly precise, and he is not alone among English playwrights and writers. In addition to Nash and Johnson, Gabriel Harvey, Thomas Heywood, Thomas Middleton, John Marston, John Day, Philip Massinger, and others explicitly invoke the Italian characters, often specifically enough to suggest that they had seen them in performance. In the 1621 Spanish Gypsy, written collaboratively by several of them, a character about to play a father in an inset play is advised to play him up high, not like a Pantalone. Several decades later, Gabriel Harvey provides strikingly specific details in gesture, pose, attitude, and costume. Do you want to come in? Okay. Gabriel Harvey, I guess they don't like it, provides strikingly specific details in gesture, pose, attitude, and costume for Pantalone Magnifico. Harvey says, "For life Magnifico's not a beck, but glorious in show. Indeed most frivolous. Not a look, but Tuscanish always. His cringing side neck, eyes glancing, physiognomy smirking, with forefinger kissed and brave embrace to the footsward." Harvey concurs with the idea expressed in the Spanish Gypsy reference of a low center of gravity for the old man. The degradation of his avian glancing eyes and sideways cringing neck plays against the glorious show of the Magnifico. Harvey here clearly satirizes the Italianate Englishman, but still animates the figure with a lively and detailed stage attitude. Okay, how did they know about the commedia dell'arte? It's a question. Look, the English Channel is hard to cross. How had Harvey, Johnson, and other English writers become so familiar with Italian professional theater? Italian troops had visited England in the 1570s, generating fascination among some for their canny ability to improvise, and they generated moral disapproval among others for the allegedly obscene and unchaste comportment of the horror of horror actresses. That phenomenon that would have seemed so odd in England. Many English, like Thomas Coriat, indeed Thomas Nash, visited Italy and brought back reports of the players. Will Kemp, who had traveled to the continent with the Earl of Leicester's men in 1586, went to Italy after leaving the Lord Chamberlain's Men and is figured in a 1607 play as acting with an Italian Arlecchino. Traveling English companies would have had occasion to see and perhaps even act with Italian actors in Paris, where the English actors are cited performing at the Hôtel de Bourgogne at a time when Italian actors were probably there. The Low Countries provides another place where Italian and English itinerant troops could have met. A later 1627 document in Prague records an English troupe and an Italian troupe simultaneously present at court. Especially relevant for Shakespeare. In the time between, in fact, the roughly, I checked this with Julia, 1590 writing of Two Gentlemen of Verona and the 1596 writing of The Merchant of Venice, in the kind of early 1590s, there appears at this particular time to have been a vogue for the Commedia dell'arte in London, especially for the unique practice of improvisation. In the late 1580s, in Thomas Kyd's The Spanish Tragedy, Italian as well as French actors are admired for being so sharp of wit that in 1 hour's meditation they would perform anything in action. As Andrew Greywar has demonstrated, just about the time of our two plays can be dated several so-called plots or plats, which bear some similarity to Commedia dell'arte scenarios. The scenarios, that it wasn't a scripted play, it was very short, just indicating the characters, the entrances and the exits, and the actions, as well as the props and things. These plats, wooden tablets indicating characters and entrances and exits with holes so they could be pegged backstage, were found in the library of Edward Allen, a great actor, and were used by several of Shakespeare's fellow actors, and possibly Shakespeare himself, to perform plays, some of which were governed by distinctly arte-style plots. One of these plots actually contains the first reference in the English language to Pantaloon, and you'll hear about the second reference very soon. And there were textual traces of the Commedia dell'arte in London. The Italian Protestant immigrant John Florio, whom Shakespeare probably knew via his patron Southampton, was said to have Commedia dell'arte scenarios in his library. Okay, caveat for the comparative literature fiend. A case could be made that Shakespeare did not need the Commedia dell'arte to write comedies like Two Gentlemen and Merchant. Let's play it out. Roman New Comedy, which already contains many master-servant theatergrams that we associate with the Commedia dell'arte, was at least as important a deep source for Shakespeare's comedies than the Italian professional theater. And we know that Shakespeare was hardwired, to say the least, into Shakespeare's brain and even body at the Stratford Grammar School. There's evidence that he might have performed these things, or people at the grammar school performed Plautus as well as studied them. And they were doing Latin from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., a lot of Latin, a lot of Plautus. There's a 16th century humanist who, sort of like Pangloss theorizes the noses are made for glasses. He theorizes the buttocks were made for schoolboys to learn Latin, because you can't do it without corporal punishment. In any comparative study of Shakespeare and the Commedia dell'arte, it is good to acknowledge where the Italian professional theater is not. Partisans for Italian influence in Shakespeare's plays do not help their cause by indiscriminate Pantalone and Zani spotting. I've seen a lot of this as a scholar. To call Twelfth Night's Feste a to call the clown of Twelfth Night, whose name is Feste, to call him a Zani, puts one in the undesirable camp of another character in the play, Malvolio, who disparages Feste as no better than the fool's zanies. We get our word zany from Zani. Feste, as well as Touchstone, the character Touchstone, the clown character from As You Like It, signature roles for Robert Armin, the new clown in Shakespeare's company, signal a sophisticated turn on the Anglo-Dutch-German fool tradition, which Eli Simon knows a lot, less than the Italian Zani. I believe that Armin's antic predecessor, Will Kemp, with demonstrable ties to the Commedia dell'arte mentioned above, is more in line with the Commedia dell'arte, though also a good English clown. Kemp, we should note, played Lance. I'm really sorry I wasn't able to see that, the dog, Crab, and Lancelot Gobbo tonight in Merchant. In fact, Shakespeare displays a deep, empathetic, and creative interest in Italian theater and the Commedia dell'arte throughout his career. Remember that the Commedia dell'arte itself is an 18th century term. Shakespeare and his contemporaries, I believe, saw both Italian scripted comedy and the professional theater as one system, which in fact it was. Shakespeare's fascination with the commedia dell'arte is very explicit, I believe, in comedies of 1590 to 1596, From Two Gentlemen of Verona to Merchant, a time when the above-mentioned arte references in the Spanish tragedy and the English plats suggest that the commedia dell'arte was really in the London theatrical era. It was hot. Although the mature comedies, As You Like It, Much Ado About Nothing, and Twelfth Night have certainly pervasive Italian influences, Shakespeare's interest in the commedia dell'arte sort of explicitly seems to have waned during this period. It oddly and powerfully resurfaces in two of his tragedies. In Hamlet, in the Polonius family, who's an old man, Vecchio, his daughter, a kind of lover, Ophelia, and then there's Laertes, the hot-headed kind of Flaminio character. But it especially surfaces in Othello, with Othello as many things, but like Falstaff, he's too rich to typologize, but there's something of the capitano in him, certainly, or the braggart soldier, right? Then there's a classic Pantalone in Othello, for those of you who don't know the play, the old man whose daughter, Desdemona, has been stolen away by Othello, so he's a Pantalone. And then there's a silly lover named Rodrigo, who's besotted with Desdemona. There's a fabricated innamorato, Cassio. The bad guy, Iago, makes Othello think that somebody else, this other young man named Cassio, is a lover. And then there's a tragic innamorata, Desdemona, and an earthy Franceschina, who's the female servant character, Emilia. And then I want to argue that Iago is a sort of Brigella who's had too many power drinks and is dangerous. It is still news to Anglo-centric Shakespeare critics that the most important source of the Tempest, last single-author play, is a body of magical pastoral scenarios about a magician shipwrecked on an island who conjures his enemies there so that he can punish them, only to forgive them at the end. About 7 or 8, at least, scenarios for which this is the plot. It is a truth universally acknowledged that when Shakespeare writes a speech about the passages of life from infancy to death, Jaques' famous All the World's a Stage set piece in As You Like It, he in fact turns to the commedia dell'arte for 4 of the 7 ages of man. The satiric use of the arte, recalling Johnson and Harvey, is not entirely absent, but the speech is full of pathos, humanity, and a kind of emotional generosity as Shakespeare reaches for different Italian masks to convey, in arrestingly human terms, the stages on life's way. All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances. One man in his time plays many parts, his acts being 7 ages. At first, the infant mewling and puking in his nurse's arms. Then, the whining schoolboy with satchel and shining morning face, creeping like snail, unwillingly to school. Then, the lover, sighing like furnace, with woeful ballad made to his mistress's eyebrow. Then, the soldier, full of strange oath, and bearded like the pard, jealous in honor, sudden and quick in quarrel, seeking the bubble reputation even in the cannon's mouth. The next stage is the justice. In fair round belly, with good capon lined, with eyes severe, and beard of formal cut, full of wise saws, and modern instances. And so he plays his part. The sixth age shifts into the lean, red slippered pantaloon, spectacles on nose and pouch on side, his youthful hose well saved, a world too wide for his shrunk shank, and his big manly voice turning again towards childish treble, pipes and whistles. It is sound. Last scene of all that ends this strange, eventful history. His second childhood in mere oblivion. Sans teeth, sans eyes, sans taste. Sans everything. Thank you. Thank you. The lean and slippered pantaloon of the speech, said by the character Jacques, closely matches contemporary verbal and pictorial representations of the Magnificat with his trademark slippers, his youthful hose, well saved, I'm ready, I'm still ready to go here, and closely clutched money bag. So, like, I do that also, I check my wallet a lot. A little bit of the pantalone in me. Though I prefer the Dottore, more on him later. It is of a detail that matches Harvey's minute description. But in a pathos well beyond what Harvey or Johnson imagined, Pantalone sees his power relative to the world shrunk down, a world too wide for his shrunk shank. With his whispering, piping voice turning again towards childish treble, Shakespeare's Pantaloon is less Johnson's ridiculous cuckold than an usher to second childhood, extreme old age, and death itself, of which the approaching actor in the play, as you like it, playing Adam, which legend reputes to have been played by Shakespeare himself, is also an image. The non-English, the Italian, is used as a very window into contemplating the strange, eventful history of human life itself. Here and elsewhere, for Shakespeare, the very evocation of the foreign can, quote, provide access to a kind of emotionality that would otherwise be unavailable in one's own culture, end quote, as Suzanne Wofford has eloquently put it. In Jacques' evocation of the old man, we certainly have the material soul, S-O-L-E, of the lean and slippered pantaloon, famous for his slippers, as the very material particularities of the figure construct his stance, his attitude. But we also have the soul, S-O-U-L, of Pantalone in the Aristotelian and Thomistic sense that the Catholic arte actors would have deeply understood, not as a ghostly entity hidden away, Plato-like, as a prisoner of the body, but as a principle of life, that which informs a body and makes it alive in a world of social beings. The souls of the slippers generate a lived posture. The lines of the mask draw a map of the desiring body, but the character is not drawn from the outside. It is animated from within. The characters are not styles, but passions. We must imagine and perform Arlecchino doing a somersault, not so the actor can show you he's had commedia dell'arte training in Arezzo, because he thinks it gets him to the food faster. So, Jacques gives us four central commedia dell'arte characters, from younger to older: the youthful lover, the soldier, a capitano, older and more seasoned than the lover, but also given to amorous passion. So the capitano can be a kind of lover himself. He's older, though. The middle-aged justice or professor, a role I have a little bit of feeling for. And the old man, Pantalone. The Italian actors tended to keep the same role, but time marches on, so there could be considerable pathos in realizing that your time playing the lover was over as you donned Pantalone's slippers. This was movingly portrayed in a recent beautiful production of a play called The Glorious Ones, a musical about the commedia dell'arte based on a novel by Francine Prose. The actor-manager, it's about Flaminio Scala and his troupe, and he's got to tell this great actress who's played the Innamorata that, you know, I think you got to move on to another role here, and she doesn't take it well. So you could actually then experience the ages of man within a long career in the Commedia dell'arte. Now, of the four masks I have linked with the arte, one might convincingly argue that the lover sighing like furnace is conventional enough and a type easily available to Shakespeare without Italian theater. As I said, let's not be overzealous comparatists, interpretive cookie cutters. Still, the parody of the Petrarchan blazon, a woeful ballad made to his mistress's eyebrow, does recall the fact that male and female arte lovers were the very ones who, that is Italian male and female actors in Italy, were the very ones who brought Petrarch and more generally the virtuosic performance of amorous wit to the early modern stage. There's nothing like that in ancient Roman comedy. Melancholy and ridiculous lovers do abound in Shakespeare, from Twelfth Night's Orsino to Othello's Roderigo, but critics from Luigi George Clubb to Pamela Allen Brown have also seen the wit and intellectual energy of the Italian actress as a deep source for characters like Shakespeare's Beatrice. That said, I think the lover is a really big category and not quite so directly dependent on the Commedia dell'arte, but animated by it. The soldier, Jaques' next age, might simply derive from the braggart of Roman New Comedy, but for the specifically fantastic cast of his imagination that we do not find in the ancient Roman braggart soldier, with strange oaths delivered to the bubble reputation. The most famous Capitano text, the 1607 Le Bravure di Capitano Spavento, is written by the great arte capitano Francesco Andreini, partly based on actual stage routines, partly post-performance literary embellishment. The dialogues in Le Bravure between the sort of Alazone, the braggart Spavento, and his servant, his ironist servant Tropolo, are precisely characterized by their fantastic and hyperbolic imagination, magical speech acts like oaths and curses and threats flung out into the ether. The character was usually from Spain, the country that had taken over Naples, Milan, and other parts of Italy in the 16th century, so that there was some political satire here. Comically, this fantastic mythopoesis is nicely encapsulated in a character from Shakespeare's Love's Labour's Lost, a play written just about this time, around 1594. Don Adriano de Armalo, a Spanish knight and braggart, goes well beyond Plautus's braggarts in verbal imagination and fantasy. Like a colossus, Armado bestrides the fantastic auto-reflexive verbal universe that he creates for himself and that exists only for him, not in fact unlike Cervantes' Don Quixote. At a certain moment in Love's Labour's Lost, Don Armado has realized that because of his overwhelming love for Giaconetta, a country wench, he must renounce the pursuit of arms for the cause of love. And here we have him making this life-changing decision.
Love is a devil. Love is a familiar. There is no evil angel but love. Cupid's butt shaft is too hard for Hercules' club, and therefore too much at odds with a Spaniard's rapier. The pasado he respects not. The duello he regards not. Adieu, valor, rust, rapier. Be still, drums, for your manager is in love.
It's a great loss for the military profession, but a capitano's got to do what a capitano's got to do. Jaques' Justice, the next stage of life, matches the Commedia dell'arte Dottore more than he does the generic early modern pedant, precisely in his conflation of food and knowledge. The Dottore is surely funny for his gastronomical intellectual confusions. Excuse me, I'm just digesting some Foucault that I've had for lunch at Tia Maria. It's very difficult to digest so much philosophy. But he's not trying to be funny. He just loves frittatas and phenomenology so much that he gets them confused. Full of water, I love this guy. Full of wise saws and modern instances, the Dottore creates a formulaic repertoire of secondary orality. He shores the fragments and shards of humanistic commonplace books against his rune as he carnivalizes language by the unfettered power of verbal association, metonymic contiguity, pure sound play akin to Northrop Frye's idea of babble as a primitive force of poetry. So, Polonius in Shakespeare's Hamlet. The best actors in the world, either for tragedy, comedy, historical, pastoral, tragical, historical, historical, pastoral, comical, historical, tragical, comical, historical, pastoral. Scene individuable, or poem unlimited. For the law of writ and liberty, these are the only men.
Wow, that guy really knows his stuff.
From his inexhaustible verbal repertoire, Polonius spouts off a series of wise saws elsewhere in the play to Laertes, and his tragical, comical, historical, pastoral speech might even arguably be seen as an improvisatory riff, possibly created by one of Shakespeare's actors in performance, that reflects the deeper practice of combinatory dramaturgy in Renaissance drama, whether in script and scenario. The next stage shifts to the lean and slippered pantaloon. After the reference to pantaloon and the plats, those scenario-like plot outlines used by the English actors in the early 1590s, the second reference to the old man in the English language appears in Shakespeare's early comedy, The Taming of the Shrew. The old man, Gremio, is dubbed Pantaloon by his successful sort of Latin lover, a good-looking guy, a young guy, Lucentio, in the Bianca subplot, which is taken from an Italian play, Ariosto's I Suppositi. And this play, by the way, of Ariosto was turned into, what? A commedia dell'arte scenario by a group of Venetian actors. When Bianca's father, Battista, asks Gremio what he might offer his daughter if she marries him, he steps right up to the plate and seems to believe that his splendid wealth might just win the hand of this woman only 40 years his junior.
First, as you know, within the city, my house is full of plate and gold, basins and ewers to lave her dainty hands. My hangings all of Tyrian tapestry. In ivory coffers have I stuffed my crowns. In cypress chests my arras counterpoints. Costly apparel, tents and canopies, fine linen, turkey cushion embossed with pearl, valence of Venice, gold and needlework, pewter and brass, in all things that pertain to house or housekeeping. Myself am struck in years, I must confess. And if I die tomorrow, this is hers, whilst when I live she will be only mine.
As one says in sports, he's leaving it all on the field. From an outside perspective, he's become crushed by the very weight of his merchandise, and one could say Venetian a la Erith, circum-Mediterranean rapine as well, plate gold, turkey cushions bossed with pearl. We feel the press of pewter and brass bearing down in his spine. I find I'm better and better able to play Pantalone as I get older and my back degresses. But that's not really acting, is it? But from his angle, from his point of desire, it's a chance to be loved. And he'll give it all for her. If whilst I live, she will be only mine. This is the soul of Pantalone. Okay, time just for a few remarks on Two Gentlemen of Verona and The Merchant of Venice. We can talk about them more in the discussion period. So just a few thoughts on the two plays. I've argued that we need to be careful in comedia hunting, figuring for absence as well as presence. I think that when we can acknowledge that Comedy of Errors owes more to Plautus than Ariosto, that the Italianate nature of A Midsummer Night's Dream lies more in pastoral drama than Commedia dell'arte, that Malvolio misses something important when he calls Feste a Zani. When we realize these things, the real animating presence of the Commedia dell'arte in Shakespeare becomes italicized. Whereas the two servants, the Dromios, might have gotten some extra inspiration from the antic Italian Zanis, and certainly can performed in commedia style, the Comedy of Errors, explicitly modeled on a Plautus play that Shakespeare probably read and perhaps performed in grammar school, is squarely in the line of Roman New Comedy, not the scripted or improvised Italian theater. Where's the love, we have to ask, for the Comedy of Errors, as we do for Plautus, the poet of lust, who was able to title a play after a young woman, Casina, who never appears on stage? Romantic love, whether initially denied by the young men in Love's Labour's Lost, traduced by Two Gents' Proteus, or ripped to shreds by Taming of the Shrew's Petruchio, in counterpoint to the ardent Petrarchan lover Lucentio in that play, animates these early Italianate comedies. It was the distinctive contribution of Italian comedy, whether scripted or improvised, to bring the love of the troubadours and the dolce stil nuovo, Dante and Petrarch, to the stage, to the tripartite old man, youth, servant, slave, the senex juventus servus structure of Roman New Comedy. Not that lust gets left behind in Shakespeare, God forbid, but in the Italians, Shakespeare could discover a more multifaceted world between, and in fact also within, the sexes, and soon enough, real women to take the stage. The early 90s Taming of the Shrew, for which we've just seen a near-perfect Pantalone, is thoroughly Italianate. It melds commedia dell'arte characters, a subplot taken from a scripted Italian play, numerous Italian tags from John Florio's facing page language learning manuals, the way I believe Shakespeare learned Italian, and the Italian setting of Padua, favored site for English students who wanted to study abroad. It shares, Taming of the Shrew shares with Two Gentlemen of Verona the tripartite structure of Vecchio, Battista, and Gremio, Innamorati, Lucentio, Bianca, Petruchio, and Kate, and Servi, Petruchio's Grumio, who the master likes to thwack from time to time. And this tripartite structure and the agonistic encounters across status boundaries animates both plot naremes and the ludic pleasures of the play. I'm talking about Taming of the Shrew, before I jump to Two Gents quickly. Additionally, largely from the Ariostan subplot, with characters both crossing boundaries and being checked at borders by surly customs officials, a vibrant sense of pan-Italian mobility animates the play as the characters negotiate boundaries between different Italian states, just as the professional actors had to do. So I'm saying a little bit about Shrew because I think Two Gents is very similar. Two Gentlemen of Verona had several sources, but the important one for the vexed relationship between Valentine and Proteus is the Italian play Il Fedele, written by the Italian dramatist Luigi Pasqualigo in 1576 and translated into English in 1584 by Anthony Munday, a hack writer and actor who, like Kemp, acted on the continent with arte players. I would signal 4 levels of Italianate resonance in Two Gentlemen of Verona. First, the tripartite structure of Vecchi, Innamorati, Servi, joined with the presence of romantic love, fundamentally animates the play. In the Duke's thwarting of the Silvio-Valentine relationship, an insistence that his daughter marry the miserly, arrogant Thurio, we have a father blocking not merely lust, as in Plautus, but romantic, Petrarchan, Italianate love, is vividly represented in the Valentine-Proteus exchange in the beginning of the play. Both Silvia and Julia, the latter disguised as a boy, become pilgrims in a fashion invented by Italian Renaissance drama, shown by Louis George Clubb. It's worth pausing for a moment to recognize how unique Shakespeare, along with John Lilly, is among early modern English dramatists in writing comedies centered around romantic love, totally absent in the city comedies of Jonson, merely a leitmotif in Middleton and others. Besides the Vecchio blocking Innamorata Aegon, Two Gents features another classic cross-status conflict, this one more ludic than narratological. The servant Speed complaining that his master Valentine is not feeding him enough. So Act 2, Scene 1, Valentine, I have dined. speed. Aye, but hearken, sir, though the chameleon love can feed on the air, I am one that is nourished by my victuals, and would fain have meat. Oh, be not like your mistress, be moved, be moved. What we might call the hunger gag, in my view, is particular to the Commedia dell'arte. Plowtine's servants occasionally complain they're hungry, but they don't make a gag of it. In the Commedia, the hungry Zani complaining about his stingy master Pantalone becomes a virtuosic turn. Shakespeare seems to have lost interest in the hungry servant gag as he continued writing comedies. I think the last appearance of this gag is actually in Merchant of Venice. It surfaces a little bit in the Tempest, but we'll do this a little bit in the Commedia thing. But Gobbo, Lancelot Gobbo, the servant, is one of the many reasons he's leaving Shylock is Shylock doesn't feed him enough. And he says to his father, "My master's a very Jew. Give him a present, give him a halter. I am famished in his service. You may tell every finger I have with my ribs." Gets a little backwards there, but yeah, you get the point. It's a great, we'll talk a little bit more about Merchant later. As a second level of Italian resonance in the play, and correlative to the first point, the play features star turns and stand-up routines for the servants' lance and speed that seem to draw on something beyond either the great slave speeches in Plautus and the stand-up routines of the English theatrical clown in the tradition of Richard Tarleton. The brilliant speech of Will Kemp's Lance with his dog Crab, in which Lance animates different members of his weeping family with his shoes and staff to contrast feeling humans with unfeeling dogs, may owe something to the specifically Italian tradition of the buffone and commedia dell'arte Zani animating entire fictionally multi-character scenes solely with his voice dietro cortine, behind the curtain. So they were famous. A lot of Italian Zani, they did this. They would stand behind the curtain and they would do all these voices. Makes me think of the late beloved Robin Williams, who was said to, in the Bay Area, when he was a young actor, he did a reading of The Comedy of Errors in 13 different Italian accents. So bless him. Thirdly, I would locate in the liminal contested area of the forest of Two Gents something akin to Italian pastoral, though perhaps nascent. A place where one is banished or to which one flees, a place of both violence and reinvention. Here we are talking about a macrostructural feature, the Italian idea of the third genre of pastoral, mediating tragic and comic modes. It's very embryonic in Two Gents, more developed in A Midsummer Night's Dream, reaching its fullest flower in As You Like It, and finally in The Winter's Tale, which Polonius would call tragical pastoral comical. Fourthly, as in Shrew, Two Gents both thematizes and enacts the theme of mobility, the sense articulated by Valentine in the play's first scene, and then by Antonio as he sends his son Proteus to Milan, that one can reinvent oneself by crossing borders, something certainly realized by the traveling Commedia dell'arte as they moved perilously but productively both between Italian states and to France, Germany, the Low Countries, Spain, Poland, and even England. All right, just a couple thoughts about Midsummer Night's Dream, and then I've got a brief conclusion. Can't do it justice. It's later. It's, I think, arguably the last comedy where they're really explicit commedia signals. We do have in the Shylock family pretty standard tripartite structure. We've got the Vecchio Shylock, and we'll do a little scene from this later in the interlude. Vecchio Shylock and innamorata daughter Jessica and servant who leaves Lancelot Gobbo. And, there's this hunger gag between Shylock and Gobbo. It's a little bit vestigial because they don't actually play out the gag, but it's referred to. Gobbo is played by Will Kemp. He has these stand-up routines, famous one about, should I listen to the fiend or should I listen to my conscience and stay, run away or stay? A real set piece between him and his blind father. There were records of props for blind men in commedia dell'arte scenarios, staff, and so forth. But I don't think this tripartite structure animates the whole play. But we don't have to have commedia dell'arte, because what we do have in Merchant of Venice, and I'm just going to briefly touch on this, is the fact that its most important source is an Italian story, an Italian novella called Il Pecorone, written by Giovanni Fiorentino in 1558. Now, the real kicker here is that I will tell you that there are incredibly resonant, I mean, there are details that are so specific, you can't imagine where else he got them. In the bond thing, the Jew says, I will take a pound of flesh in whatever part of his body I please. Says, that's what it says in the Italian novella. And then he says, and then the lady, the Portia figure, comes disguised as a lawyer, says, okay, you can cut him up, but no, you can't spill any extra blood, right? That's only and there are many more things. So the thing is, this thing wasn't translated into English at the time Shakespeare wrote his play. So I believe that it's evidence that Shakespeare knew Italian well enough to read something. And I actually believe that the way he learned Italian was through these Florio language learning manuals in the course of the 1590s. He didn't go to university where he could learn it like Spencer. He didn't have a private tutor like Sidney. He learned it kind of the hard way, through books. So yeah, it's a great story. The Bassanio figure is he's the youngest son. He doesn't get an inheritance, but his father says, "Oh, I'm sorry about that, but you go to. I got no money for you, but go to your godfather, who's very wealthy, and he can set you up." So he goes to the Bassanio figure goes to the Antonio figure, Ansaldo, he's called, in Venice, and he lives with him for a while, and then the Bassanio figure says, "Hey, I really want to do some traveling," and Ansaldo, I'll use the Italian names, is so generous. He says, "Sure, go, and I'll have some ships accompany him." So Gianetto travels. He's traveling. He sees this really interesting port. He sort of circles in, and the other ships keep going. And he hears there's this lady, and she's got this test for young suitors. It's really interesting. Very different from Shakespeare. The test is not caskets. It's, if you can have sex with me, you marry me. If you can't have sex with me, I take all your possessions. Very interesting. So he goes the first time, and one of her servants gives him a lot of wine, some really good, Cabernet or Chianti. He falls asleep and wakes up with, "What happened? Oh, you didn't do it. You couldn't." So it's about sexual prowess. And so she takes all this stuff. He comes back, tail behind his legs to Venice, and finally, he works up the courage to ask Ansaldo to do this again. He does it again. He goes a second time. This time the lady is more interested because when it's bedtime, it says that she's undressed. But he still gets this, some Chianti and misses the sex. And same thing happens. Then he goes back, a year goes by, and he works up the courage to ask. And Ansaldo is just, infinitely generous and gives him more. And then, but he only can do it by borrowing money from the Jew, right? And the Jew makes this bond and says, "I would just love to get back at this Christian. This would be a great..." So all the vengeance of Shylock is in the Italian story. And then he goes, and one of his... it's amazing how he keeps forgetting not to drink the Chianti, but he needs a reminder from one of the servants, and he has sex with her. And yes, and she's really happy about it, and they get married, and then they have a very similar scene to the one in Merchant of Venice, where everything is saved by this woman disguised as a lawyer, stipulating that no blood can be spilled. So it's really, really great. So I think what does Shakespeare do with that? He kind of takes out the sex part. I'm not saying that Shakespeare loves sex. He loves lust. He loves dirty jokes, but he likes to have romantic love in there too. Of course, with the ring jokes at the end, it's a lot of sexual imagery. Okay, just a brief conclusion, if I could. The few contemporary accounts of commedia dell'arte performance that survive don't talk much of soul or pathos, but rather dwell on the external virtuosity of the Italian actors, their verbal wit, physical dexterity, graceful gesture, and compelling rhetoric. But there was something that Shakespeare saw, something about characters driven by the basic passions of human existence. As he does with so many other theatrical influences, Shakespeare takes his sources and infuses them with new complexity, new energy, and new animation. The soul of Pantalone's slippers, taken in by the host country, generates something like soul in the wider sense. The Commedia dell'arte was world literature par excellence because it has traveled so well to France, Spain, the German regions, Italy, Holland, Poland, closer in our own day to Russia, Latin America, and very recently, even to American prisons, where the actor Tim Robbins has been doing Commedia dell'arte work with incarcerated actors. It had, and it has, the requisite energy, interest, and power to cross boundaries and to be reinvented each time on the other side of the frontier. The Arte's system of flexible, recombinable, improvisational, tragical, comical, pastoral theatergrams, oh my God, I'm sounding like Polonius, made it the perfect transnational machine. When Shakespeare translated the Italian Pantalone into the man whose world has become too wide for his shrunk shank, the passage of the foreign across the boundaries sparks a reimagining of the old man. With porous cultural boundaries, English theater became better. Shakespeare's theater provides a rich example of a national culture made richer and more complex by virtue of international exchange. Shakespeare and Renaissance theater amounted to a feast of international translatio, which has lasted not 4, but 400 years. Culture is both powerless and powerful. Shakespeare itself won't help new Americans from banned countries visit their relatives at home. But if we consider the long history and the abiding value of transnational theatrical invention, from Shakespeare's openness to the Italians to German Romantic theater's receptivity to Shakespeare, we can, at least for a moment, say with Shakespeare's Cleopatra, "'Tis paltry to be Caesar." Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Henke, for a really rousing lecture. I want to do two things while you collect your thoughts, because Robert Henke has agreed to take questions and comments and things. I'm going to just bring up the slide that has the title on it, because it also has a picture, an image of Pantalone, that full body image. And I got rid of it too zealously because I was told you to not on the slide behind you.
Yeah, that's my fault.
Let's see if I can just make this come back on. And then I have to take back my self-correction and remember that there is actually a like a 7-minute style. So there's a full body image of a Pantalone. So I can't see really well, but I'm going to stand here and just point to people who would like to say something.
Do you see anything in the plays that resonated?
Oh, I'm really neophyte, so maybe the question I'd ask is now. Pantalone means like pants in Italian, Spanish.
Correct.
What does it really refer to in the Commedia dell'arte? Pantalone, what does it refer to?
What does a Pantalone refer to? I mean, there. Right. I think that's the etymology of it. I'm not an expert on costume, but it's the hose that he was wearing.
But is it a character? Does it mean like he's a rich person?
Right. I'm sorry if that wasn't clearer. He is a wealthy but very stingy merchant in Venice. He's kind of he originally was called a magnifico. He's a citizen of Venice. He has a certain kind of standing, and there can be we emphasize the ridiculous aspect of him, but there could be a sense of gravitas. So he's a merchant, a very wealthy merchant who made a lot of money. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. So Antonio is a kind of Pantalone in that he's a merchant, but Shylock, he works with finance, but yeah. Yes. You with the hat.
What's your shape, man? What?
What's the significance of the slippers, the felt slippers and so forth? Did I understand correctly?
Right. I was trying this, clever, probably too clever academic pun that he's known for his slippers. These, what are they, red? The hose were red, yeah, the hose were red. And it was beautiful slippers, maybe from the...
So there would be like, good leather, there would be something that really good body.
Who's he?
This is Pantalone, what this gentleman asked
So
about.
Pantalone is a character, not a type.
Oh my gosh, yes. He's a type. But right. He's a general type that is played by many actors and is done over and over again in these Italian plays. And he has the slippers, and they're a real trademark aspect of him. So, and I think they sort of condition how he walks. So I think they're very important to him as a character. Yeah, of course, yes. I'm so glad you asked that, actually. Yeah.
When Shylock, I guess characteristically, wears this red cap, right? Is that some reference to these red slippers? I mean, is that a carryover or sort of a...
Yeah, I'm going to push this back on
So I
here.
don't know, maybe perhaps you're referring to that also in terms of the production, but we're going to see the production tonight, so I don't know if you're talking about the production.
No, I'm talking about the movie with Al Pacino.
Of course.
I understood that Shylock frequently has a red cap
So
on.
they're probably playing on the fact, and working with the fact that the Jews in Venice would have been marked a certain way, and it alternated between hats that were yellow or hats that were red, depending on the...
Thank you.
Yeah. So thank you very much for asking that. I hope I didn't go over the characters too fast. This will merge in the next couple hours. Yes.
Well, I'm wondering, this presupposes a lot, but do you have any theories of your own about the true identity of Shakespeare? Who was Shakespeare?
He was a man whose father was a glover and a very important person in Stratford, and he got an education which is similar to a BA in classics. The Latin he got at Stratford Grammar School, and so he's from the country, and he came to. I think he was, the man from Stratford. I think he wrote the plays, yeah, and I think he did. He's very well read, starting with what he read at the Stratford Grammar School. The references to the classical mythology and so forth in his very first plays would have been exactly what you would have come to if you had had this splendid, though kind of painful education.
How many languages do you think he spoke?
I think he just, well, that's a good question. I suspect that he spoke some French, that he lived with some French Huguenots for a time. I think he was maybe better reading Italian than speaking it. And he probably could speak Latin, in a way. Yeah.
Would his training have geared him toward that? Or that was something he did on his own?
The
learning Italian, learning Latin.
So Latin he got in school, at the Stratford Grammar School. And then I think, but he wouldn't have gotten Italian at all. He wouldn't even come close to Italian there. And then I think, he's in London later, and it's really it's the most important foreign language really. And I believe that he learns it. And I believe that he knows this man named John Florio who wrote dictionaries, and he wrote these kind of Berlitz type language learning manuals with facing page. Kind of an easy way to learn a foreign language, because you see quotes from Florio in Taming of the Shrew, in Shakespeare's plays. So I think he kind of deliberately studied these manuals and read enough Italian to, I think, be able to read the source of Merchant of Venice. So I think at that point it was motivated by his theater training.
Mm-hmm. The Florio books, was that something like a Berlitz?
Exactly, exactly. He was a big, he taught the Queen, Florio did, Italian and other people, and he was a major presence, yeah.
That was great, thank you very much.
Thank you, that was a great question, yeah, thank you.
Yes, just making sure that I understood this correctly about the soul and soul connection. And it seems to be, as you're describing the characters, that they had, that they would step into the mask, they would step into the costumes, and that they would embody kind of from the outside in the character. Are you making a lean saying that Shakespeare was kind of taking these embodiments and making them, turning it into like how the person would think or how the person would behave?
That's really well put. I think actually both in Italy, myself, and I mean, in Italy you've got the whole thing that you've been talking about, the slippers and the costume, but I think even there, when you have all these external apparatuses, you still have actors animating it from within. And then Shakespeare, people are probably not dressing as Pantalone in the plays, but I think he goes even further in bringing a soul to it. Yeah, but I think you've perfectly understood what I was saying. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I wanted to digress a little bit from Shakespeare, everybody. It's fascinating to learn about or give us the insight from the 16th century. Is it a novella? And I can't remember in Italian.
Il Pecorone.
Why is it called the sheep herder? Is that what that means? Or the sheep? The pecorone is the what?
Big sheep.
Oh, it's a big sheep, not the sheep herder. It's the big sheep.
Dummy.
Oh, because it's like a fantoche, like a comic figure, like a.
I can't tell you why the thing is named.
In colloquial Italian, a pecorone is,
A buffoon?
a dummy, get it?
Okay. Now I get it. Thank you. Grazie.
You've reached my ignorance. You've hit my ignorance because I don't know exactly. I confess I don't know exactly why that text has that title.
Who was the author again?
Giovanni Fiorentino.
I've heard. I had some smattering of it some 40 years ago, but I never. Maybe I've forgotten. I never realized there was so much.
It's still a useful source of Shakespeare. It's
I never
an
realized
eight-volume
there was so
thing by
much
Jeffrey
from
Bullock, the sort of
That was brilliant.
the sources of Shakespeare, and he's got that printed in it. Yeah, and that's the differences are pretty wild. Julia.
Can you tell us a little bit about how you got these masks and how actors use them and why you own so many?
Yeah, I mean, it was a long time ago. It was a long time ago, and digress a little bit. My first stop was the first time I saw Shakespeare's Globe, where I now teach some every other year, and I felt, okay, I'm in the perfect theatrical machine. The space is just, this space is the heart of it, and the actor-audience relationship. Then I went to see this guy named Renzo Antonello, who made these masks in a little town near Venice, and went down into his shop, and he had all these rows of, he had about like 60 wooden models of masks, and they were just so nuanced. And people say, these are stock characters, the Zani does this, the Pantalone does this. He had about 20 different Zani, all just nuanced, right? There's the archaic Zani, there's the Baroque Zani, there's the farmer Zani, and they're just infinitely, and and I kind of tried them on, in his shop, and it was funny. I've got a funny story. I was saying, I was doing Arlecchino. I said, hey, I'm really kind of feeling it with Arlecchino, right? I really like this, this guy. And he says, actually, I see you more as a vecchio. This was 15 years ago. So, yeah, he's great. He actually worked in the famous Italian mask making shop, the Sartori school. There was a whole renaissance in Commedia dell'arte after the Second World War. A guy named Amleto Sartori. And then he worked there, and now he actually teaches sculpture in a liceo, in a high school, but he makes masks for a lot of people. I mentioned this guy Dario Fo, he made masks for him, and he's a really good guy. Yeah. Yes?
Yes, I have 2 points, and one is that when you made the point about, the transnational crossover, when I'm looking at those masks, and my daughter said, those look like Korean.
Oh, interesting. Oh, fascinating.
I just thought.
Yes, what similarities do you see?
They just look very similar.
Yeah.
The kind of wooden, the shapes look very similar.
Yes, and I mean, I believe in cultural specificity, but how many kinds of families do we have in the world? We usually we have fathers, we have children, and we often have servants. So this thing can reappear in many places. There's a great shadow puppet theater in the Karagos Theater from Turkey, and they're really remarkable connections. Maybe Arif, I think, knows more about this than I do. Maybe really particular connections, but it's both universal and also specific. Yeah, it's a great question.
The other point that I wanted to make, and this is a compliment because I think it's just a tour de force in how you connected, the English xenophobia against foreigners to, what's going on and today, and your allusion to the pantalone in chief.
Sure. Oh yeah.
The figure with the capital T.
Yeah.
The last allusion, your reference to Cleopatra.
Yeah. Well, it's the long view or the short view. I mean, it's pretty bad what's happening on the short view, but I'm expressing my political opinion, I guess. But but to think of these longer things, these things we love, Shakespeare, and I really believe that Shakespeare is not possible without this openness to the foreign. And it's important to. Thank you so much for that. Yeah. Yes.
No, I actually have a sort of related question, I guess. I really love the idea of the soul and the soul. And with the Thomist soul, that soul is kind of it's, if I remember right, and I'm so sorry if I'm wrong, it's not dualist, right? It's sort of this more connected, interwoven thing, right?
Right.
And so I was just wondering, maybe there's a third soul in your talk as well, with the soul of a country, and how do you decide on that, right? And I'm not I've been thinking through it, and I'm not sure which is better, a dualist soul or a sort of monist soul. But if we take the soul of the country as it is, isn't that a better thing?
The soul of a country, of a nation?
What is your identity? Who are you?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm working with Cymbeline, and I'm just thinking of Queen's speech, and her speech is very much, we gotta get a wall, right? That's my whole thing there.
Yeah.
And so it's what kind of nation do you want? Do you want a nation that I guess is sort of isolated and walled off, I love this idea of evil Mayday, and I'm probably going to...
Yeah, if the true soul of a nation is porous to engagement and to the world, versus a soul that's kind of Shylock, shutting itself in, yeah.
I'm just wondering if there's going to be a...
That's really great. I'll think about that more. I mean, I actually need to really think through the Thomistic stuff, but I think it's very non-Platonic. It's obviously Aristotelian blending of
So you mentioned briefly the influence of Italian pastoral on Shakespeare and these ideas of exile. Was that already integrated into Commedia dell'arte, or was that something that came from Shakespeare?
I'm so glad you asked me that. I love talking about pastoral because I did write a thing on Shakespeare's late plays. And Italian pastoral tragicomedy, and the idea of pastoral as a hinge between tragedy and comedy, which was in there. But it does show up in the Commedia dell'arte, pastoral. We normally associate Italian pastoral with the court, with people like Battista Guarini, very elite court drama. But the Commedia dell'arte did it also. They did these scenarios about these woodland areas, and many of them with a plot, which is really the plot of the Tempest. And you can find these things as early as kind of 1570, 1580. They weren't totally written down into kind of recorded until 1618, which is after the Tempest, but it reflects a tradition that's much longer. Now, you have to remember that Commedia dell'arte did not just do comedy. This is commedia in the sense of kind of theatrical. They did tragedy, they did something kind of like heroic drama, and they did a lot of pastoral. And the pastoral would allow them to, it was more kind of melopoetic. It would allow them to almost kind of anticipate opera. There was a lot of singing in Italian pastoral. Yeah, I really appreciate that question.
I think there's one more comment that we'll take from Ariane, and then we're going to break.
So just to add to everything that you were saying, there is one Italian pastoral comedy written by one of the most famous commedia dell'arte actresses and writers, which was actually, so even though the scenarios were written down later, this play was published in 1588. So right before Shakespeare started to write. So Shakespeare may not have known this play in particular, but it's indicative of the kinds of things that are circulating. It's called La Mirtilla, and the writer is Isabella Andreini.
That's actually really important to acknowledge that. So yeah, it was in fact recorded well.
In this case, what do you mean by pastoral?
Yeah, it's plays that are in a natural setting. Conventionally, it centers around the shepherd, and sometimes the shepherd is really a courtier who's kind of disguised as a shepherd, or it might be a real shepherd. It can be extended. They can be fishermen. They can be farmers. Robert Frost is a great pastoral poet. Yeah, is that?
That does. Thank you.
Okay, well, I want to thank Professor Robert Henke for taking